was a night like no other, the kind where the shadows stretch long and the chill in the air sends shivers down your spine. On July 14th, 2023, the serene waters of the Hamptons glistened under a full moon, unaware that a tragedy would soon unfold. The Ripple, a luxurious 60-foot yacht that had graced the coast for years, was docked at the Montauk Yacht Club, one of the most exclusive spots in the Hamptons. A beacon for the wealthy, the powerful and the glamorous. It was here that Martha Nolan-O'Slatarra, a rising star in the fashion world, would take her last breath. The sun had long set, and the luxury of the yacht contrasted sharply with the sinister events that were about to transpire. Martha, 33 years old, was an acclaimed designer known for her glamorous swimwear line East by East. That night, she was aboard the yacht with Christopher Durnan, a 60-year-old insurance tycoon and investor in her brand. They had gathered to discuss business, but for Martha, it was a decision that would become her final one. The waves outside lapped quietly against the hull of the yacht, but inside, tensions were rising. Durnan was a man with a dark past, a reputation marred by scandal, and Martha was growing more uncomfortable with the situation than anyone realized. The allure of success had led her to trust him, until it didn't. Around midnight, chaos struck. At the Montauk dock, Durnan was seen sprinting, half-dressed and frantic. His voice cracked in desperation, screaming for help. Something had gone terribly wrong. A woman, Martha, lay dead on the yacht. And Durnan, the last person to be with her, was the first to act as though he was the victim. But was he? Emergency responders arrived, but it was too late. Martha Nolan-O'Slatarra was dead. No one knew how, no one knew why, but the Ripple would soon be synonymous with tragedy. The Suffolk County Police Department arrived on the scene, and the investigation began immediately. Detective Simone Donovan, along with her team, quickly discovered that the life of the beautiful and talented designer had ended under mysterious circumstances. There were no visible signs of injury, no wounds, nothing to explain the cause of death, just the emptiness of her lifeless body sprawled across the yacht's deck. But there was something more, something darker, something about the way Christopher Durnan behaved in the hours after the death raised the first red flags. And the more the investigation delved into the details, the more it became clear that this wasn't a simple case of an accidental overdose or a tragic misfortune. This was a carefully crafted lie waiting to be unraveled. This is the story of Martha Nolan-O'Slatarra, the glamorous designer whose life was cut short on a quiet night in the Hamptons. A life that, until then, had been full of promise, ambition, and dreams of a future in the spotlight. But in the darkness of that night, something went terribly wrong. And now, as the truth comes to light, we're left to ask what really happened on the Ripple that night. The fateful meeting. The night was heavy with anticipation. The Montauk Yacht Club, located at the edge of Long Island, was a glittering jewel in the quiet, affluent enclave of the Hamptons. It was July 14th, 2023, and the luxury yachts docked in the marina cast long shadows under the waxing moon. The breeze that ruffled the water's surface carried the scent of salt, and something else. Something more ominous, lingering just beneath the surface. A yacht, sleek and pristine, bobbed gently in the water, its name Ripple, the boat that would forever be linked to tragedy. At that moment, it was more than just a vessel. It was a symbol of promises, a life of luxury, and a dangerous partnership between a powerful tycoon and a beautiful designer. Inside Ripple, Martha Nolan-O'Slatarra, a 33-year-old rising star in the world of fashion, stood at the polished bar, her reflection fractured in the glass. She was everything the Hamptons admired, sharp, driven and glamorous. Known for her bikini line East, Martha had taken the fashion world by storm, attracting attention not just for her designs, but for her beauty and intelligence. Her smile was magnetic, and her presence was a carefully curated combination of sophistication and effortless charm. But tonight, something felt off. Her eyes flickered to Christopher Durnan, the 60-year-old insurance tycoon who had been her investor and, more recently, an increasingly unsettling influence in her life. He was standing near the deck, his back straight, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed wealth and power. He was older, but something about the way he looked at her sent a chill up her spine. His sharp, calculating eyes made it clear he wasn't just interested in her business. He wanted more. "You're looking radiant as always, Martha." Durnan's voice was smooth, almost too smooth, like butter spread too thin. He took a step closer, his cologne clinging to the air between them. "Your success, it's impressive, but you haven't reached the full potential of your brand yet." Martha's lips tightened, just slightly. She had heard these words before, but tonight they felt different. Durnan wasn't just a business partner. He was the type of man who could twist your ambitions into something else, something darker, more dangerous. "I'm glad you think so," she replied, her voice steady, but beneath it was a tremor, a subtle unease she could no longer ignore. Durnan smiled, leaning in closer, almost as if he was reading her thoughts. "I've been thinking about the future. You and I, we could create something unstoppable. I can help you get there, but there's more to success than just talent. It's about knowing who to trust, who to let in, and who to keep close." Martha took a slow breath, her fingers curling around the rim of her glass. "I've always trusted my instincts, Christopher, and they're telling me that I should be cautious." There was a flicker of something cold in Durnan's eyes. He took a step back, his smile never wavering. "Caution is for the unambitious," he said softly, his words lingering in the air, hanging like a threat. "And you, Martha, you're far too talented to play it safe." She felt the air grow heavier, the tension in the yacht palpable. There was something about his presence, his control, that unsettled her, yet she couldn't quite place it. She glanced out over the water, the dark expanse stretching out into the distance, offering no answers. The yacht was anchored far from the shore, and the water seemed to reach out to her, cold and indifferent. "I'm not playing it safe, Christopher. I'm just being careful," Martha said, her voice quieter this time. Durnan's eyes flashed, a brief moment of irritation before he masked it with another smile. "I admire caution, but I'm afraid in this world, caution can be a death sentence." He turned away from her, moving toward the edge of the deck. "The sea has a way of revealing our true selves, don't you think? Look at the vastness. It makes all our problems seem so small." Martha stared at the horizon, the subtle sway of the yacht beneath her feet, amplifying the unease bubbling inside her. This wasn't just a business meeting. Something was wrong. She could feel it now, a gnawing feeling in the pit of her stomach. The air was thick with words unspoken. Christopher Durnan, the man who had promised her the world, was a man with many secrets. And tonight, it seemed, his true intentions were beginning to surface. She tried to push the thought away, but it lingered like the stench of something foul. As the evening stretched on, Martha couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting wasn't about business. It was about something more, something darker. Her instincts told her that she needed to leave, but it was too late. Christopher Durnan had already ensnared her in his web, and the consequences of trusting him were only beginning to unfold. Moments later, Suffolk County Police were on their way, alerted by a frantic call from Christopher Durnan himself. His voice, shaky with panic, had conveyed little more than a string of desperate words. "She's not breathing! Help, please!" But when the authorities arrived, it was too late. Martha Nolan-O'Slatarra was dead. Her body was lifeless, cold to the touch. The paramedics tried desperately to revive her, but there was no pulse, no breath. Only the chilling silence of a woman whose life had been snuffed out, her dreams and potential extinguished in a single violent moment. The yacht, once a symbol of power and success, had become the scene of a crime. The police were quick to cordon off the area, but no one, not even Durnan, knew what had truly happened. There were no signs of a struggle, no weapons found on the scene. The cause of death was unclear. Was it an overdose, a heart attack, an accident? The answers were locked within the silence of the yacht, waiting to be uncovered. As the investigation began, one thing was certain. Christopher Durnan was hiding something. The calmness of his demeanor, his lack of visible distress, set off alarms. What had really happened on that yacht? What had driven Christopher to end Martha's life so abruptly?
The tragic discovery. The moon hung low in the sky, its silvery light dancing on the black surface of the water as Ripple floated silently on the outskirts of the Montauk Yacht Club. The yacht, once a symbol of wealth and luxury, now seemed to echo with an unsettling stillness, like a predator watching its prey. Inside, the soft hum of the engine was the only sound that filled the space, a quiet hum that contrasted sharply with the growing tension between the two people on board. Martha paced across the deck, her mind racing. Her conversation with Christopher had shifted, subtle but unmistakable. She had felt his eyes on her in a way that made her skin crawl, as if he was studying her every move, every word. His charm, once so magnetic, now felt like a veil, concealing something dangerous underneath. The night stretched on, the only light coming from the dim lamps on the yacht's deck and the occasional flash of a passing boat. Christopher had gone below deck, leaving her alone with her thoughts. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that the shadows themselves were closing in on her. The quietness of the night deepened, and for the briefest moment, Martha allowed herself to relax, leaning against the railing and gazing out at the vast black sea. It was then that she heard it, the sound of footsteps on the deck, followed by a low voice, distant yet familiar. "Martha!" She turned quickly, her heart leaping in her chest. Christopher stood at the top of the stairs leading to the lower levels of the yacht, his silhouette framed against the dim lights. His presence felt different. His face was harder now, more calculating. "I need to talk to you," he said, his tone softer than before, but there was an underlying edge to it. "We've been dancing around the real issue all night." Martha felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Her instincts, sharp as ever, screamed at her to walk away, to get off the yacht, to leave. But she stayed. Something about him was drawing her in, against her better judgment. "What issue, Christopher?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. She could feel the weight of the conversation hanging in the air like a storm cloud, ready to break. He stepped forward, slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "The truth. What really brought you here tonight? You think I don't know? You think I haven't been watching you? You've been trying to cut me out, haven't you?" Martha froze, her stomach lurching. How did he know? How did he know? "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice a little too sharp. She took a step back, her hands gripping the edge of the railing for support. "You were going to expose me," he said, his voice low, dangerously calm. "You were going to tell everyone what I did, what I'm capable of, and you think you can just walk away without consequences." Martha's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, trying to piece together his words. She had planned to expose the affair, to break free of his grip and take control of her life. She had even prepared a statement, something to protect her reputation and finally distance herself from him. But Christopher had always been 2 steps ahead. Always watching. Always listening. "You're wrong," she whispered, trying to steady her breathing. "I never wanted to expose you. I just wanted to move on, to be free of this, of you." Christopher's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "That's where you're wrong, Martha. You don't get to leave me. Not like this. You're mine. You always were. And now, it's too late." Before she could react, Christopher closed the distance between them. He reached out, grabbing her arm with a force that sent a jolt of panic through her. She struggled to break free, but his grip tightened, his fingers digging into her skin. "Martha, listen to me," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "You've made a mistake, a huge mistake, and now you're going to pay for it." Her heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to pull away, her eyes searching for an escape. But the yacht was alone, miles from shore. There was nowhere to run. For a moment, it seemed as though time had stopped. The only sound was the quick, shallow breaths between them and the soft whisper of the ocean against the yacht's hull. Then, in a flash, it happened. Christopher pushed her backward, and before she could regain her balance, a sharp, metallic scent filled the air. She gasped, feeling a sudden pressure in her chest. The world around her began to blur, her vision narrowing, her limbs growing heavy. She stumbled, gasping for breath, her hands clutching at her throat. Christopher stood over her, watching with cold, calculating eyes. And then she collapsed. The last thing she saw before everything went dark was his face, his expression unreadable as he stood over her, the glint of something sinister in his gaze. Moments later, Suffolk County Police were on their way, alerted by a frantic call from Christopher Durnan himself. His voice, shaky with panic, had conveyed little more than a string of desperate words. "She's not breathing. Help, please." But when the authorities arrived, it was too late. Martha Nolan-O'Slatarra was dead. Her body was lifeless, cold to the touch. The paramedics tried desperately to revive her, but there was no pulse, no breath. Only the chilling silence of a woman whose life had been snuffed out, her dreams and potential extinguished in a single violent moment. The yacht, once a symbol of power and success, had become the scene of a crime. The police were quick to cordon off the area, but no one, not even Durnan, knew what had truly happened. There were no signs of a struggle, no weapons found on the scene. The cause of death was unclear. Was it an overdose? A heart attack? An accident? The answers were locked within the silence of the yacht, waiting to be uncovered. As the investigation began, one thing was certain: Christopher Durnan was hiding something. The calmness of his demeanor, his lack of visible distress, set off alarms. What had really happened on that yacht? What had driven Christopher to end Martha's life so abruptly? And was this just the beginning of a much darker story that no one could have predicted? Unraveling secrets. The news of Martha Nolan-O'Slatarra's death spread like wildfire across the Hamptons. The bright, bustling world she had once moved through now felt like a dream slipping through the cracks. Her sparkling reputation, her chic bikini line, her vision for a future that would never come. The tragedy of it all seemed too incomprehensible to fully grasp, yet the details, cold and hard as steel, were beginning to unravel. The yacht was still docked at Montauk Yacht Club, its grand exterior now marked by the intrusion of yellow police tape. The once peaceful waters surrounding the yacht were now tainted with the echoes of a crime, and detectives from Suffolk County Police Department swarmed the scene, gathering evidence. They moved with practiced precision, but the case was anything but straightforward. Christopher Durnan, the last person to be seen with Martha, was standing just a few feet away from the detectives, his broad shoulders stiff with restraint. His eyes were downcast, and he had a 1,000-yard stare, as if the horror of the night had already etched itself into his soul. But to those watching, it looked less like grief and more like guilt, like the cool, calculating composure of a man who was hiding something. Detective Simone Donovan, known for her unflinching approach to cases, took the lead in the investigation. She was a seasoned investigator, used to handling high-profile cases, but even she couldn't ignore the feeling that there was more to this story than met the eye. The scene had been too clean, too quiet. It didn't make sense. There were no signs of a struggle, no obvious injuries, and most importantly, there was nothing to explain why a woman like Martha, so full of life and promise, would suddenly be gone. "Mr. Durnan," Donovan said, her voice steady but firm as she approached him. "I need you to come with me." Christopher's face twitched, but he nodded, the slight shift in his posture betraying the hint of tension that had been brewing beneath his composed exterior. Once in the small interrogation room, Christopher sat across from Donovan, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. His eyes met hers, cold and controlled. "I've already told you everything," he said, his voice low, almost bored. "I told you I found her on the deck. I tried to revive her, but there was nothing I could do. She was already dead." Donovan finished, her gaze unyielding. "I know. But what you haven't told me, Mr. Durnan, is what really happened on that yacht." Christopher's expression remained neutral, though there was a flash of something in his eyes. The veneer of calm began to crack ever so slightly. "I've told you everything. What else do you want me to say?" Donovan leaned in, her voice softer now, almost coaxing. "You were the last person to see Martha alive, Mr. Durnan. We've seen your record, your history of violence. There are questions, and I'm going to get answers." Christopher stiffened. His fingers stopped drumming. The facade of indifference slipped for just a second, revealing the thin layer of panic beneath. "I don't know what you want from me," he muttered, his voice strained. "I didn't do anything." Donovan held his gaze, unblinking. "Tell me about your relationship with Martha. How well did you really know her?" Christopher's lips twisted into a smile, though there was no humor in it. "We were business partners. That's all. We had a few personal conversations here and there, but nothing more. She was talented, ambitious, and frankly, she was going to make me a lot of money." There was no mention of their romantic involvement, no mention of how Martha had confided in her close friends about a growing fear of Durnan's manipulation, or how she had been planning to distance herself from him in the days leading up to her death. Donovan knew there was more. There had to be. "Then why," she asked, her voice cool, "were you so eager to get her on this yacht? Why did you ask her to join you on the night she died?" Christopher's eyes narrowed, a slight tremor in his jaw. "We were finalizing a deal. That's all." "Finalizing a deal," Donovan repeated, not buying it. "And when did this deal turn into an argument about Martha wanting to leave you? About her wanting to break free?" Christopher's face remained impassive, but Donovan could see the shift in his eyes. Something was cracking. She was getting closer. Meanwhile, Martha's family, her mother, father, and younger brother, were reeling from the news of her death. Her mother, Teresa Nolan, had been one of the first to arrive at the police station, demanding answers. She was devastated, but there was something else there, an underlying anger that had only just begun to boil to the surface. Her lawyer, Arthur A. Dalla, was already involved. He had come on board to ensure that Martha's estate and her legacy were protected. But this was about more than money. This was about seeking justice for a woman who had been taken too soon, and too violently. They knew Martha hadn't been just another victim of an overdose or a random accident. This was murder. But the question was, who had done it, and why? The investigation led them deeper into Christopher Durnan's life. It wasn't just about Martha. It was about his entire history, his violent outbursts, his manipulative tactics, and his ability to weave a web of lies that entrapped those around him. Durnan had been involved in a 2022 lawsuit for a violent assault at Webster Hall, a dispute that had escalated quickly and ended with him pleading guilty to disorderly conduct and a lesser charge of drug possession. There was also the suspicious disappearance of a former girlfriend, who had allegedly cut ties with him after claiming he had become too controlling. But no one had ever connected the dots, not until now. As the team dug deeper, more of Christopher's patterns began to emerge. The affair with Martha wasn't just about sex or business, it was about control. She had been another pawn in his game, another woman to dominate, to manipulate. But Martha had been different. She was strong, independent, and smart, and she had known what she was up against. The deeper they went into his past, the clearer it became. Durnan wasn't just a businessman. He was a predator. Days later, toxicology results from Martha's autopsy were returned. The cause of death was not an overdose. It was not a heart attack. The cause of death was suffocation. No drugs, no alcohol. Nothing but air, cut off. Slowly, methodically. This was no accident. And now, with the evidence piling up, Christopher Durnan was the prime suspect. The question was, would he crack? Would he admit to what he had done? Or would he continue to play the part of the victim in this tragic story? The investigation into Martha's death had only just begun. But every piece of the puzzle was pointing in one direction, Christopher Durnan. And in the silence of the Montauk Yacht Club, the truth was beginning to emerge. The distraught boyfriend. Nicholas D. Rubio sat in the sterile, quiet room, his hands gripped tightly together on the table. His mind was a blur of grief, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. The world he had known, the life he had shared with Martha Nolan-O'Slatarra, had been shattered in an instant. His phone had buzzed that fateful night, an alert about the police discovering a body, and just like that, the woman he loved was gone. He had heard it on the news, but the reports had felt distant, surreal. It wasn't until the police arrived at his apartment the next morning, their faces grave, that the horror truly hit him. Martha was dead. And though the officers were careful with their words, it was clear, this was no accident. Now, sitting in the small police room, Nicholas felt like a prisoner to his own thoughts. His chest was tight, as if the weight of the world had settled there. Detective Simone Donovan had already spoken with him once, but she needed more. She needed answers. And what could he offer? He had no idea what had happened that night. He hadn't been there. He had been at home, like any other night, waiting for Martha to come back from what she had called a business meeting. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized things hadn't been right with Martha for some time. She had grown distant in recent weeks. She'd been making phone calls late at night, sending cryptic messages, and her conversations had shifted to something he couldn't quite understand. At first, he'd attributed it to the pressures of her growing business, but now, sitting in this cold room, Nicholas wondered if he had missed something. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and Donovan entered, her gaze sharp as ever. She was a woman who had seen the darkest corners of human nature, and yet, as she looked at him now, he could see the empathy behind her eyes. She wasn't just investigating a murder. She was investigating a life torn apart. "You were the last person to speak to Martha, Nicholas," Donovan said, her voice steady. "I need to know more about your relationship with her. What was she going through?" Nicholas swallowed hard. We were close. I loved her. I know she was struggling, but she didn't want to talk about it. She kept things to herself. She didn't want to burden me, but she didn't seem like herself in the days leading up to her death. There was something off about her. He paused, his voice trembling. She was scared. I could see it in her eyes. But she wouldn't tell me what was going on. Donovan's gaze softened, but her expression remained professional. "Do you know about her relationship with Christopher Durnan?" The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Nicholas felt a cold surge of jealousy and anger. Of course, he knew about Durnan. Martha had been working with him for months, but she had also begun to pull away from him. She had told him about some meetings, some business deals, but she hadn't been forthcoming about the details. "Not much," Nicholas muttered, struggling to form the words. She said he was her investor, but there was something off about him. I didn't trust him. I could see the way he looked at her. And I know she didn't trust him either, but she didn't want to talk about it. It was like she was afraid of him. Donovan leaned forward. "Do you think she was involved with him romantically?" Nicholas recoiled slightly, the suggestion stirring something deep in him. He had never wanted to believe it. It was too painful. But now, with the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together, a sense of cold dread washed over him. "I don't know," he said hoarsely. "I don't think she wanted to be, but I'm starting to think maybe she had no choice. Maybe he had too much control over her. It doesn't make sense. She was strong, she was smart. Why would she get involved with him like that?" Donovan paused, letting the silence hang between them. She watched him carefully, studying his every word. "You're right, Nicholas. Martha was strong. But sometimes, people fall into traps they can't get out of. And it seems Christopher Durnan has a history of trapping people. Women, especially." Her words hung in the air like a warning. Donovan continued, her voice low and deliberate. "We're finding more about Durnan's past. He's not just a businessman. There's something darker about him. His exes, his business partners, they've all been tangled in a web of manipulation and control. And from what we're uncovering, Martha was no exception." The truth hit Nicholas like a freight train. He could hardly breathe through the intensity of it. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted, had been involved in something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Donovan stood and walked to the door, turning to face him before leaving. "We're going to need more from you, Nicholas. Your relationship with Martha, with Durnan, everything you know. Your role in this is just beginning to unfold, and I need you to be honest with me." Nicholas stared at the floor, his mind racing. He wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that Martha had been pulled into Durnan's world, or the realization that he had failed to see the danger until it was too late. The investigation moved forward, relentless. Each new discovery about Durnan's past was more unsettling than the last. A violent history, a penchant for manipulation, and a web of deceit that seemed to stretch far and wide. Durnan wasn't just a businessman with a temper. He was a predator, one who had used his charm and influence to control every woman who had ever come into his life. The Suffolk County Police Department uncovered more details about his past. In 2022, Durnan had been involved in an assault at Webster Hall, where he had physically attacked a man over a trivial matter. A restraining order had been issued against him, but it had been quickly lifted, a pattern that seemed to repeat itself. He was a man who had avoided consequences for far too long. But it wasn't just the past that haunted Durnan. The toxicology reports from Martha's autopsy had confirmed what everyone feared. She had been suffocated. No drugs, no alcohol, no apparent wounds. Just the cold, deliberate act of a man who had taken her life with nothing more than his bare hands. The question now wasn't how she died, it was why. And the answers were buried in the heart of Durnan's twisted obsession. The police weren't the only ones pushing for answers. Martha's family was growing desperate, refusing to believe the narrative Durnan was trying to sell. Arthur Adala, their attorney, had begun to make waves, demanding access to evidence, pushing for a clearer understanding of what had happened that night. But the darkness around Martha's death was far from over. There was something still left to uncover, something that would change everything. The lingering questions. Nicholas couldn't sleep. It had been weeks since Martha Nolan-O'Slatarra had died, but the haunting images of that night, the yacht, the chaos, the desperate calls for help, still echoed in his mind. His dreams were filled with the sound of her laughter, now silenced by the cold finality of death. But even worse than the nightmares was the question that gnawed at him every waking moment. Why? Why had Christopher Durnan killed her? Why had he done this to the woman Nicholas had loved more than anything? The more Nicholas learned about the man who had claimed Martha's life, the more the puzzle pieces fell into place, yet the picture they revealed was no less mysterious. He knew Durnan had a dark past, but what had really been the tipping point? Was it a crime of passion? Or had he simply grown tired of her, trying to break free from his grasp? Martha had been planning to expose him. There was no doubt about that. She had been ready to walk away, to free herself from his hold, and that, perhaps, had been the final straw for Durnan. But even as Nicholas pieced together the fragments of Martha's final days, something was still missing. He had seen the footage, the pieces of evidence. He had heard the police accounts of her suffocation, but there was a deeper layer to this crime, something darker still lurking beneath the surface. He could feel it, like a shadow, just out of reach. That was when the call came. It was Arthur Adala, the family's lawyer. Nicholas could hear the strain in his voice as soon as he picked up the phone. "You need to come to the office, Nicholas," Adala said urgently. "We've got new information. It's about Martha's journal. She left a message for you. Something you need to see." Nicholas's heart skipped a beat. Martha's journal? He had heard about it, of course. How she'd kept a private account of her thoughts, her struggles, her fears. But it had never occurred to him that her final words might be hidden in the pages. The thought of hearing from her, even if only through her own written words, felt like a lifeline. "On my way," he said quickly, his voice hoarse. The law office was quiet when Nicholas arrived, the overhead lights buzzing faintly above him. Adala was waiting for him in a small conference room, a stack of papers on the table in front of him. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed with the weight of the case. "I can't imagine what you're feeling right now," Adala said as he gestured for Nicholas to sit. "But I think this might give you some closure." Adala handed him a small, worn leather-bound notebook, Martha's journal. Nicholas opened it carefully, the pages stiff and crinkled from years of use. His fingers traced over the ink, and then he began to read. May 12, 2023. I've never felt so trapped in my life. There's a part of me that feels like I'm drowning, and the more I try to swim to the surface, the heavier the weight becomes. Christopher is suffocating me, in every way. Not just physically, though that too. He's controlling every aspect of my life. My work, my decisions, even my thoughts. I'm terrified of what he'll do if I try to leave. If I ever get the courage to leave. May 14, 2023. I don't know who I'm more afraid of right now, Christopher or myself. There are days when I feel like I'm losing who I am, losing the ability to think for myself. I've been making excuses for him, trying to justify his behavior, but deep down, I know the truth. I'm trapped, and I don't know how to get out. I've started making plans to distance myself. It's risky. If he finds out, I fear it might be the end of everything. May 16, 2023. I've made up my mind. I'm going to expose him. The world needs to know what he's capable of. I'm scared, terrified even. But I can't live like this anymore. I have to take control back. But I can't do it alone. Nicholas, if anything happens to me, you need to know that I love you. You're the only one who ever really saw me for who I am. Nicholas's hands shook as he finished reading, the weight of Martha's final words crashing into him like a tidal wave. She had known. She had been planning to escape, to expose Durnan for who he really was. And yet, in the final moments, she had been silenced. He closed the journal with a heavy heart, his thoughts racing. Durnan had not just killed her for control. He had killed her because she had dared to take her life back. And now, Nicholas knew what he had to do. He couldn't let Martha's death be in vain. He had to finish what she had started. He had to expose Durnan, not just for her murder, but for everything he had done to every woman he had ever manipulated. The investigation was heating up. Detective Donovan had been putting the pressure on Durnan, but the man was slippery, always one step ahead. Yet, even as the case seemed to stall, Nicholas found himself digging deeper into Durnan's past, using the resources he had available to him. He had a new resolve now. He wasn't just looking for justice for Martha. He was looking for revenge, and he would stop at nothing to make sure Durnan paid for what he had done. But as he looked through the mountain of evidence, a chilling realization began to set in. The more he uncovered, the more he understood how deep Durnan's influence had gone. He wasn't just a criminal. He was a master manipulator. He had planted himself into the lives of countless people, business partners, ex-lovers, anyone who could be useful to him, and used them as pawns in his game. Christopher Durnan wasn't just dangerous. He was a force of nature. And now, it was Nicholas's turn to play the game. But as the walls closed in around Durnan, Nicholas's own life began to feel as though it were spiraling out of control. The deeper he dug, the more Durnan pushed back. He knew what was coming, and he wasn't going to go down without a fight. The question was, who would win this battle? The final confrontation. The nights had grown colder, the tension in the air thickening with every passing day. Christopher Durnan was aware of the noose tightening around his neck. His once pristine world, carefully built on wealth and manipulation, was beginning to crumble under the weight of the investigation. He could feel the heat of Detective Simone Donovan's pursuit, relentless, smart, and unyielding. But what terrified him most was Nicholas DiRubio, the man who had loved Martha and now sought nothing less than justice. The final confrontation was drawing near, but Durnan wasn't the type to go down without a fight. He had lived his entire life controlling the narrative, playing the game to his advantage, and now, with everything at stake, he wasn't about to let it slip away. It was early morning when Nicholas received the call. His phone buzzed with a message from Adala. "It's time. We need to meet Durnan face to face. It's the only way to end this." Nicholas had expected this moment, had known it was coming. The pieces of the puzzle were all in place. He had seen the reports, read the evidence, and knew the man who had once seemed untouchable was now cornered. But sitting across from Durnan, staring into the eyes of the man who had destroyed the woman he loved, Nicholas felt a wave of dread wash over him. This was more than just a confrontation. It was a reckoning. He met with Detective Donovan and Arthur Adala in a small conference room in the police station. Adala was the first to speak, his voice cold and calculating. "We have everything we need," he said, glancing at the file in front of him. "We've linked Durnan to several previous violent incidents, and we have Martha's journal. But there's still one thing we need, his confession." Nicholas clenched his fists under the table. "I don't care about his confession," he said, his voice hoarse. "I want him to pay for what he did to her." Donovan nodded, her gaze steady. "That's what we're here for. We'll make sure the evidence is airtight. But he's a master manipulator. He'll try to talk his way out of it. He'll try to turn this all on you, Nicholas." Nicholas's eyes hardened. He won't get the chance. The meeting took place at a private estate on the outskirts of the Hamptons, a location Durnan had chosen, knowing the isolation would give him the upper hand. The atmosphere was unnervingly calm, the estate's grandeur masking the venom beneath the surface. As Nicholas and the team arrived, Durnan was already waiting, seated in a dark leather chair, his posture immaculate, his expression unreadable. He looked every bit the part of the man who had once controlled Martha's life. But now, there was a crack in his armor, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Mr. DiRubio," Durnan said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've been expecting you." Nicholas didn't respond. He stood at the door for a moment, letting the tension build, then stepped into the room with Donovan and Adala flanking him. He could feel the air in the room thickening, the atmosphere shifting from cordial to charged. "I'm glad we could finally sit down," Durnan continued, his voice smooth. "I know it's been a rough time for you, Nicholas. For all of us. But I have to say, I didn't expect this level of persistence. You've been quite thorough." Nicholas's gaze locked with Durnan's. "You're going to pay for what you did to her. For everything." Durnan's smile faltered, just for a second. He leaned forward, his hands steepled together, the expression on his face now more guarded. "You think you've won, don't you? That you've got it all figured out. But you don't know the full story. None of you do." "You killed her," Nicholas said, his voice steady, but his anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "You suffocated her. Because she wanted to leave you. Because she wanted to expose you. You couldn't handle the fact that she was stronger than you." Durnan's eyes flickered, a coldness creeping in. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers lightly tapping on the armrest. Martha was never stronger than me. She was a product, Nicholas. A tool. A beautiful, talented woman who could have had it all. But she wasn't enough. Not for me. She never understood the game. Donovan's voice cut through the tension. The game is over, Durnan. It's time to face the consequences. Durnan's gaze shifted to Donovan, then back to Nicholas. You think you're the good guy here? You think I'm the villain? His voice dropped to a cold whisper. You've been played too, Nicholas. You were nothing but a pawn in her life, just like I was. The only difference is I knew how to use her. You never understood her like I did. The words hit Nicholas harder than he expected. His chest tightened, his jaw clenched, but he didn't look away. I loved her. I knew her better than you ever could. And that's why you killed her. Durnan's eyes narrowed, his mouth curling into a thin smile. Love? You think love makes you stronger? It makes you weak. And that's what happened, Nicholas. She thought she could play the game, too. But in the end, she was just another victim of it. Just like you. Nicholas felt his blood run cold. He had always known there was something twisted about Durnan, but hearing the man speak with such casual cruelty, such detachment, shook him to his core. The realization hit him. This man was pure evil. There was no remorse, no regret in his voice. There was only cold, calculating indifference. We have everything we need, Durnan, Donovan said, stepping forward. Your history of violence, your connection to Martha's death, your attempts to manipulate the truth, it's all here. You're finished. Durnan's smile faltered, just for a split second, before he quickly masked it with a laugh. We'll see, detective, he said, rising slowly from his chair. We'll see who wins this game. The police had Durnan in custody just hours later. They had the evidence, Martha's journal, toxicology reports, and the growing list of witnesses to Durnan's manipulative and violent tendencies. It was enough to bring him down. And while he fought, denying his involvement, the weight of his crimes caught up with him. As Durnan was escorted out in handcuffs, Nicholas stood outside the estate, watching as the man who had ruined his life, and taken Martha's, was led away. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the sprawling grounds, and for the first time in weeks, Nicholas allowed himself to exhale. The battle was over. The truth had won. But it had come at a cost. As the police car drove away, Nicholas turned his gaze back to the horizon, the ocean before him as vast and empty as his heart. Martha was gone, but her story, her fight, had not been forgotten. And that, in the end, was the only victory that mattered. The truth revealed. The courtroom was a quiet battlefield. Christopher Durnan sat stoically in the defendant's chair, his usual air of superiority now replaced by a cold, calculated composure. His lawyer, a seasoned defense attorney with a reputation for pulling rabbits out of hats, had gone through every possible argument to avoid a conviction. Yet, despite their best efforts, the evidence was overwhelming. The trial of Christopher Durnan for the murder of Martha Nolan-O'Slatarra had captivated the media. From the moment Durnan had been arrested, every detail of the case had been plastered across the front pages of newspapers and broadcasted on television. The once untouchable tycoon, who had hidden behind his wealth and influence for years, was now facing the consequences of his actions. And the public, both captivated and horrified by the revelations, was watching closely. Nicholas D. Rubio, though haunted by his loss, was present in the courtroom every day. He had become an unintentional witness, but in truth, he had a role to play in all of this, just as Martha had wanted. The final chapter of her story was being written in this room, and he was determined to see it through. The first day of the trial was a slow, grinding procession. Detective Simone Donovan, the prosecution's star witness, took the stand. Her calm, unflappable demeanor contrasted with the raw emotion in the courtroom. She was meticulous, every answer sharp and exact. She described the evidence, the toxicology reports, the autopsy results, and the damning footage from the yacht's security cameras. Each piece of evidence stacked higher and higher against Durnan, until the weight of it all became impossible to ignore. Then came Martha's journal, the final piece of the puzzle. The prosecution presented the diary entries, Martha's words echoing through the courtroom as they were read aloud. The haunting revelations of Martha's fear and her plan to expose Durnan shook the audience to its core. Nicholas sat in the gallery, his heart heavy with each passing word. It was as though Martha was speaking to him from beyond the grave, telling him what he had already known. She had been trapped in a web, and in the end, it had suffocated her. The journal was the final piece of her fight for freedom, a message to the world that had been left behind, just waiting to be heard. Christopher Durnan remained silent for most of the trial, his expression hard, unreadable. He had not shown any visible remorse, but when it came time for his defense to cross-examine, his true nature began to emerge. Durnan's lawyer launched into a carefully orchestrated defense, painting Martha as a woman who had been emotionally unstable, who had fabricated the affair, and who had orchestrated her own death. They tried to turn the narrative around, suggesting that Martha had been suicidal, that her relationship with Nicholas had been fraught with tension, and that her final actions had been an attempt to frame Durnan for her tragic end. But each attempt to twist the truth was met with solid rebuttal. The defense's case began to fall apart as Arthur Adala, representing Martha's family, presented a chilling portrait of the man Durnan truly was, a man who had used and manipulated everyone around him, a man who had controlled Martha, and ultimately, had killed her to silence her. The pivotal moment came when Nicholas D. Rubio was called to the stand. His hands trembled as he stood before the judge, but his voice was steady as he told his story. He spoke about his relationship